Okay, let's dive right into this explainer with one of the most terrifying, absolutely inexplicable events in aviation history. Picture this. It's a clear, beautiful afternoon in December 1945. Five United States Navy torpedo bombers, known as Flight 19, take off from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. It's a completely routine, over-water training mission. The skies are blue, the pilots are highly trained, and everything is going exactly according to plan. But then, literally without warning, everything just falls apart. The flight leader radios the tower with this chilling message. He says his compasses are spinning wildly. His exact words, "We don't know which way is west. Everything is wrong. Even the ocean doesn't look as it should." As the afternoon drags into the evening, the radio transmissions get frantic. The planes are hopelessly lost, just circling over the open ocean until their fuel tanks run dry. And then, total, absolute silence. Five massive military aircraft, and all 14 men aboard, simply vanished. But wait, it actually gets worse. A massive Mariner flying boat with a crew of 13 was dispatched to rescue them. Within minutes of arriving in the search area, that rescue plane vanished too. No wreckage, no survivors, no answers, just an empty ocean.
Now, before we get into solving the mystery, you really need to understand the sheer scale of these vanishings. We aren't just talking about a single tragic afternoon back in 1945. Over 50 airplanes and massive ships have been swallowed up by this exact same stretch of the North Atlantic Ocean without a single trace. I mean, just think about that number for a second. Over 50. And in almost every single one of these cases, there was no distress signal, no mayday call, no oil slicks, and absolutely zero debris washing up on the shore. It is literally as if the laws of physics were just temporarily suspended and hundreds of tons of metal and human life were completely erased from the timeline. It's this staggering, recurring volume of disappearances that really cemented this region's terrifying reputation.
What's really wild about this is how quickly a completely routine military flight descended into absolute chaos. This timeline instantly hooked the world on the mystery. Look at this. At minute 0, it's a perfectly normal day. By minute 90, severe, totally unexplainable disorientation sets in. The compasses fail. The seasoned flight leader can literally no longer trust his own eyes or his instruments. By minute 120, their radio contact with the mainland starts cutting out, replaced by heavy static and these panicked fragments of conversation among the pilots. And by minute 240, it is all over. A complete disappearance. It's the terrifying speed and totality of this event that transformed a tragic oceanic accident into a massive global phenomenon. Section 1. Defining the Devil's Triangle. So have you ever flown over the Atlantic near Miami, Bermuda, or Puerto Rico? You might have been completely unaware that you were cruising right through the infamous borders of the Devil's Triangle. If you draw a line from Miami, Florida, out to the island of Bermuda, down to San Juan, Puerto Rico, and then back to Miami, you encompass roughly 500,000 square miles of open ocean. This is the stage for our entire mystery. And here's the thing. It's a massive, heavily trafficked patch of water. Cruise ships, commercial airlines, cargo vessels, they pass through these invisible borders every single day. Yet for decades, entering this specific geometric space felt like rolling the dice with the unknown. Section 2. A history of vanishing ships. You see, Flight 19 wasn't an isolated event. Let's step back into history and look at how this lore was built upon the watery graves of some truly massive vessels. Take the USS Cyclops in 1918. The crucial point here is that a colossal ship like the Cyclops didn't just sink, it was entirely erased from existence in the blink of an eye. This was a massive Navy collier, over 500 feet long, loaded down with magnesium ore and carrying 309 crew members and passengers. It was traveling through the region on its way to Baltimore. The weather was reportedly completely calm, and yet the ship never arrived. It sent no SOS. Not a single life preserver was ever found floating in the water. The loss of the Cyclops still remains the single largest non-combat loss of life in U.S. naval history. How does a 500-foot steel behemoth just slip into a void? And then you have these incredibly eerie, almost contagious disappearances, which just brilliantly illustrates the chilling nature of these waters. Take the story of the Ellen Austin. In 1881, the American schooner Ellen Austin was sailing through these waters when it stumbled across a completely abandoned yet perfectly seaworthy ship, just drifting aimlessly. The captain of the Ellen Austin put a prize crew on the ghost ship to sail it back to port. But shortly after, a fierce storm separated the two vessels. When the Ellen Austin finally caught up with the derelict ship a few days later, the new crew had vanished, gone. It was a ghost ship all over again. Stories exactly like this laid the foundation for the belief that something genuinely sinister was actively hunting out there in the open ocean.
Section 3. Myths and Wild Theories. When dozens of ships and planes just vanish without a trace, human imagination runs totally wild trying to fill in the blanks. Let's look at some of these popular conspiracies. From aliens to sea monsters, people were desperate to blame literally anything other than the ocean itself. Once the media caught hold of these vanishing acts in the mid-20th century, the theories just exploded. People hypothesized that extraterrestrials had set up an underwater base to abduct humans for research. Others pointed to giant prehistoric sea squids pulling entire ships under the surface in a matter of seconds. Some even claims the area was home to an interdimensional portal, a rip in the fabric of space-time, or even leftover crystal technologies from the lost city of Atlantis. I know, it sounds totally absurd to us now, but when you have 500-foot ships vanishing without a trace, a sea monster suddenly feels like a completely reasonable explanation to a terrified public. Section 4. The real scientific explanations. All right, let's move into the second half of our explainer and see how science systematically dismantles these supernatural legends. By comparing the myth to the reality, we quickly see that extreme, completely unpredictable weather patterns in the North Atlantic are far, far more deadly than imaginary sea monsters. This region of the ocean is notorious for its volatile weather. It's an absolute breeding ground for powerful hurricanes that can literally snap a ship in half. Furthermore, the area is highly prone to sudden, hyper-violent microbursts. These are intense downdrafts of air that hit the surface with the force of a tornado, and they can instantly flip a vessel or swat a low-flying aircraft right out of the sky. The reality of nature is just far more brutal and efficient than any supernatural force we could possibly dream up. Step by step, the scientific consensus points to a deadly combination of sudden storms, navigational human error, and the fast-moving Gulf Stream wiping away the evidence before rescue teams can ever arrive. Let's break down this anatomy of a disappearance because it makes a lot of sense. First, the violent weather strikes without any warning. Second, panic sets in, which leads to devastating human error. In the case of Flight 19, the flight leader became spatially disoriented. That's a very real psychological phenomenon where a pilot's brain actually tricks them into ignoring their perfectly functional instruments. Finally, and honestly, this is the smoking gun, we have the Gulf Stream. The Gulf Stream is essentially a massive, incredibly swift river flowing within the ocean right through the specific region. If a plane crashes or a ship sinks, this powerful current acts like a giant conveyor belt, sweeping all the wreckage miles and miles away from the crash site in a matter of hours. By the time search parties arrive at the last known coordinates, the evidence is already completely gone.
Section 5. Solving the ultimate mystery. So, what should you really take away from this vast collection of vanished planes, lost ships, and wild theories? This quote perfectly captures our psychology. Despite having concrete scientific answers, we simply love a good, terrifying mystery. The stats actually prove that this area doesn't see a higher rate of disappearances than any other similarly trafficked region of the world's oceans. Crazy, right? The World Wildlife Fund doesn't even list it in their top 10 most dangerous waters for shipping. Yet the myth persists. And why? Because a story about an alien abduction or an Atlantean death ray is inherently way more captivating than a story about a pilot misreading his compass during a storm. We are just hardwired to seek out the extraordinary, and we cling to the supernatural to make the vast, indifferent ocean feel a little more purposeful, even if that purpose is completely malevolent. But here is the thing. Even with the myths totally debunked by science, I have to ask you one final question. Would you feel entirely safe taking a boat ride through those waters tonight? Think about it. You know the statistics, you know all about the Gulf Stream and those crazy microbursts. You know that thousands of commercial flights cross it safely every single day. But human psychology is a funny thing. Knowing all of this, when the sun goes down and you are completely surrounded by the pitch-black, endless expanse of the North Atlantic, wouldn't a small part of you still wonder what happened to the men of Flight 19? The science is settled, absolutely, but the allure of the unknown remains. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning what you think you know.